everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Lounge Podcast, episode 21. Today we've got a full house. We've got Kite, Hex, Sean Lester, Echoes, and Dawn. Guys, you can say hello, everyone.
Greetings.
Hi.
Hello.
Yes. Today this has been a long time coming with next gen. We talk about today's next generation stories. I could start us off if you want, Lester. I know it's your topic, but I could start off if you wanted to.
I'll let you go.
Okay.
Start us off.
Yeah. So, next generation stories. What I mean by this is kind of, I guess, an easy example is like Naruto to Boruto, where it's just there is a main character from a story. They've gone through their journey. The journey is complete, and then many couple of years later, the son or next prodigy comes up, and that main character's around, but it's meant to be following the main character. I think the reason why this topic comes up and I find it really interesting is, besides maybe a few things I've seen recently, I haven't seen good examples of it. Whenever I think about them, a good few of the times, at least I haven't put two together with them. Oh, hey, Will.
Oh wow! Now it's a real
That's
party.
a real fighter, yeah.
Oh boy.
Football people.
Yeah. So, what I was saying, yeah. So whenever I've seen it, I always felt like any next generation stories I've seen, it's always lacked in actually making the most of what could be done with that kind of trope. So I think that's the reason why it kind of stuck with me on why I wanted to bring it up. But yeah, I think that's the next generation stories in a nutshell. Beyond that, let me just see who would like to go first about the.
I'll go. I'll go first. So yeah, this is I think this has been like a very interesting topic for me because, as Nate said, like there have been very hit and miss examples of this in media. Like, and you've definitely heard me berate Boruto several times, which I am not going to be doing this time because I think I've done it to death. But I do think like there's like a lot of value in. There's a lot of like like, how do I put this? Sorry. I definitely see the appeal, especially if it's either like a series that has like a very strong following and you want to see more of. So let's go do more. Or if it's like a very old, like something like there's like in some cases decades old, and you decide to bring it back. But do you bring it back in sort of the original format where it would relate more to people of that era, but certainly not to a modern audience? Or do you attempt to modernize it just for the modern audience, in which you sort of alienate the old, say, original fans?
There was that balance, yeah.
Definitely feel like it's the case of something like, I'd say, Terminator, which is in a franchise that has struggled really since the second film. But there have definitely been like examples of when it's done right. And I think the way to do it right is just strike a balance. Like, because ultimately you're not going to appeal to everyone, but it's definitely like try to come to a compromise. And in the case of the actual story, like the basis around it is always sometimes it's the actual kids of the original hero. So it's always about just finding sort of this way to kind of just have your new protagonists, have the old, but sort of make them sort of relevant to both parts of the story. So you sort of have like in some cases like two very separate things, but that sort of connects to a greater whole. And for me, like two really good examples I have. Like, one is like a show I've been pretty much gushing all the time, which is Cobra Kai, which is the spiritual successor to the original Karate Kid movies, which I feel the perfect example of how to do these sort of next gen stories. Essentially, you have the original cast from the old film. So you have Danny LaRusso, you have Johnny Lawrence, and these aren't sort of like they're like exactly the same as they were in the 80s. They still have their own like character arc. They still are still developed throughout the story, even though they're like now in their, I believe they're in their 40s now. Like, their story doesn't just end because of the original movies. It keeps going, and then at the same time, you have the next generation, the kids, and their stories will be different. They'll be influenced by basically the what came before, like particularly in the first season with like the rekindled rivalry between Johnny and Daniel. But they all have their own stories. They all have their own character arcs, and most importantly, are not clones of what came before. They are their own people. With like my two favorites being Miguel Diaz and Robbie Keane. And then my other example, like, I think it's like a more lesser known one, which is like the Gears of War after under like the Coalition, which I'll touch on like really quickly. It's simply like it follows the sort of son of Marcus Phoenix, just called JD. But then you have two other characters who don't have any connection to the original cast, and it sort of blends it very well, as you have like, you know, Marcus and like the old gang sort of feeling like, I think the best term of it is the last action hero. They're men of the 80s, and they feel like in the game they feel sort of they're in like this completely different generation, and then you have sort of new generation that sort of like written sort of like with quips of like a Marvel movie, but sort of all finding a way to sort of come together in a way that doesn't feel like one's playing off against the other. I won't say Gears writing is the best in the world, because it absolutely is not, but it's definitely a good example of just sort of finding that equilibrium, if that makes sense. Okay, and I believe I've rambled enough, so Dawn, I think you are next. I'm going to rest my voice for a bit.
Thanks. I actually really liked some of the points that you brought up, especially with the idea that the new generation needs to be able to essentially pick up the mantle without kind of demeaning the previous one. So the example I was actually going to bring up is Seven Deadly Sins, Next Generation story, which is Four Nights of Apocalypse. So, big warning for spoilers if you haven't finished that series yet. Not that many people want to finish Seven Deadly Frames, but anyway. So yeah. So in Four Nights of Apocalypse, the way that they handled the idea that a new generation should essentially take up the mantle from the old one was that they made the villain Arthur. So Arthur has a power that the others can't actually interfere with because none of them have human blood, and the one person who did actually died in the previous he died in a previous iteration of the story. So the new heroes all have some level of either mixed or deep or human heritage, and that's part of the reason why the previous generation aren't able to help with the new crisis. And I think that's a very good way of making it so that a new generation story, the new generation feel relevant and have great callbacks to the previous one, but at the same time they still have a conflict which is pretty unique to them. And the one thing I did really like about Four Nights of Apocalypse so far is that the previous conflict was caused by the old generation, and sorry, not to call you out, Kite, but in Kite's story, he kind of has a similar kind of theme with the idea of having the previous generation causing conflict that actually affects the newest one. And honestly, I really like it when authors do that because it makes the world feel more cohesive because you can understand it a lot better when you're like, oh, wait, people's actions do have consequences. And yeah, so I would honestly say in Seven Deadly Sins with the newer generation story, Four Nights of Apocalypse, one of the best ways that they make sure to make the story feel like it respects the previous generation is that constantly we constantly get affirmations on how strong the previous generation is. At the end of the series, Meliodas more or less becomes a god, even if he's not the Demon King. And then obviously we have Elizabeth, who is the supreme deity's daughter, so she's basically a goddess herself. And with these two people who are essentially gods on Earth, their child is the one who has to pick up the mantle because of their racial makeup, they legitimately cannot do anything. They can't actually have an impact on this new villain because Chaos actively rejects them for being a demon and a goddess. But meanwhile, their child, because he has mixed blood, he can't be fully rejected and, i.e., can have effect on Chaos as a villain. So I would definitely say that one thing that all next gen stories need to have is a level of respect towards the previous generation. It doesn't need to be straight up reverence. It doesn't need to be, they don't need to be singing praises to the previous generation all the time. But I think that they need to have a level of respect because I actually feel like this is where Boruto ran short, which is part of the reason why I really struggled to get into the series. I feel like they kind of shat on some of the previous generation Naruto characters, and also there were a lot of choices that didn't really make sense. I don't want to start ranting about Boruto, but I will bring up this. So, for example, right in in Boruto, Naruto is not only is he a deadbeat dad, but he's also never present, which is so contrary to the type of person he would have been, considering that he often lamented how he didn't have parents and how he wished he had someone there. And even in the last, or even during the Infinite Skill Me, he literally dreamed of a life where he had parents and he had an upbringing that was more traditional, per se. He would never fail to provide that for his own son, even if he couldn't always be there. The idea of him using clones to maybe talk to his kids back home, that makes sense. The idea of him being so not present that Boruto literally admires Sasuke for basically being closer to a dad than Naruto was is just ridiculous. And I think that honestly, Boruto as a series, I think it shat a bit too much on the previous generation. And because of that, it made me feel like the new generation was being built up artificially. I think that when you build up a new generation of heroes or protagonists, whichever term you prefer, as we discussed in the previous episode, but anyway, when you build up a new generation of protagonists or heroes, you need to pay some respect to the previous generation and give the new generation a unique niche that wasn't completely replicated. Because we need to, as an audience, understand why the previous generation, who are all at this point all endgame heroes who are basically new game plussing at this point, why those guys won't sort out a conflict that they could do a lot faster. You need to essentially be able to justify the new conflict and also make it so that it makes sense why the new generation must take care of it rather than the old one. So yeah, respect the old generation, give the new generation a reason to exist outside of money. Yeah, so that's pretty much my point.
I
I'll hand it off to
can.
the next person.
So, kind of just to kind of springboard off of what Don mentioned, a lot of what you brought up kind of lines up with how I would prefer to see a next generation story. Something that is built off of the actions and ambitions of the previous is what usually gives us the most compelling stories. So, the example that I'd like to use is a game example. I hope that's valid. So, the game I'm thinking of is Fire Emblem 4 Genealogy of the Holy War. Now, like the game already implies, genealogy, it is in reference to the fact that it is a multi-generational story following the life of Sigurd and eventually his successor Seliph. To kind of sum it up without going into like dozens of hours of gameplay and maps, there is a conflict throughout the continents in this game, and it is up to Sigurd and his friends, some of which are already in relationships, to storm into these other locations and to liberate the world. But the problem is, the main struggle in this story is, as Sigurd and company continue to do good deeds as far as the player is concerned, what ends up happening is, little by little, they're crossing several lines. Because what ends up happening initially is, most of these kingdoms are vying for control of different lands. But as you go along, it's really Sigurd's territories that are benefiting from this rebellion, from this war. So because of that, it turns public opinion against them. Eventually, it's clear that Sigurd and company are in this awkward position of, if they do not persist, the world is going to be in a hell of a worse place than it already started. But on the other hand, the deeper we go, the farther we gain from that purity that we started with. So ultimately, Sigurd and company do end up getting basically wiped out at the end of their arc. But later on, their children are left to pick up the mantle. So just to kind of leave that as a summation, what I'm really getting at is the fact that this story is heavily based on the sins of the previous generation. Because, like, no matter how justified a hero's journey may be, there are some abject consequences that can be left behind as a result of their actions, whether it is a good thing or a bad thing. What we end up with is the generation not only picking up from the works of their parents, but they have to confront many of the sins that were left behind by them. Even if it wasn't intentional, that's where a lot of your story potential comes from. What you end up having is a matter of the previous generation is no longer around to face the sins of their actions, and the ones who are around, they're either suffering greatly for it, they're either getting tortured, or in the worst case scenario, they're not capable of speaking or communicating how they really felt about anything to their children. Some of them never even get to meet their children once they reach the age where they can understand what's going on. So what you have is a situation of separation. On top of that, we're born into this world that we inherited, but now not only do we not understand most of the decisions that led to the world that's been created, we now have to find some way. We now have to find some way to clean up the mess of our parents, and not only that, but to at least come to terms with the fact that while we might not understand what their actions meant in the moment, we at least. Oh my gosh, I am rambling. I'm rambling. I cannot get my thoughts straight. I know we're kind of doing a thing where we raise our hands and everything right now, but I don't mind someone picking up, because I know what I want to say, but I am actually getting lost for a change.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, I think I could pick up. No worries. Yeah. So I think before I start my point, I actually just realized, because when I started this, I said, yeah, I can't think of any good examples of a next gen story I've read besides I think Cobra Kai. I'll probably talk a little bit about it out in a bit. But I just realized JoJo exists. What am I talking about?
That's a fine example.
JoJo's pretty decent.
I definitely say that's a really good example.
Yeah, it does it so consistently as well. But yeah, I'll probably maybe touch on that a bit. But I think I guess my main point was it's something that I sort of think about more, because I thought about this topic for a while, but something I thought about more when Lester was talking was about Boruto, and I think Boruto is not simply bad because it doesn't give respect to the main character. I think it's bad because the writers don't have any confidence in their own character compared to Naruto.
Right.
Like, I'm gonna try and extrapolate to like a main story point, but like, it's that you feel that non-confidence in the page to the point where it feels like he got to prove himself. You know, it's kind of like a child when they think, oh, I'm better than this person, I'm better than this person, I'm better than this person. It's like, okay, cool, then just be better than this person. Be your own person. Stop bringing out that person. Otherwise, you have that comparison. They do it to the point where you can't help but keep comparing them. Like, unconsciously we will do that. I think we'll compare the previous generation to the next generation in these kind of stuff.
That's inevitable.
That's inevitable. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I think like Cobra Kai actually. Not only does this, but also uses that as
I'll touch upon that a bit, but I think guys, so I think with Boruto is we all consciously do that anyways. But what problem with Boruto, which is a bad example, is they're so blatantly keeps like mentioning it. They have the character himself keep saying, I'm not like my dad. I'm not like my dad. To the point where it diminishes who he is as a person. He just feels more like the more he says that, the more it pushes that to the forefront. You can't even see who he is, even if you want to, because he keeps bringing it up. Also another thing, you're saying about him not being there for Boruto and stuff. It's so true. It's like it's such a betrayal of what Naruto is. If anything, like I don't get me wrong. I get why they did it. I get why they did it, because they want conflict, and they want that they want to, in the story they want conflict. But I felt like in that, at least in that show, I think the conflict they would have had is Naruto probably doing the opposite. If anything, maybe being a bit too present. Like that could have been a good conflict in some way.
I think the problem that we're mostly having with the example that we're mentioning is that most of the conflict seems to be born more of, dare I say, the need to create an artificial issue rather than to just kind of lean into the issues of the day. Because fundamentally, familial drama in these kind of stories is inevitable, if you ask me. You're going to have, like I mentioned before, there is going to be a bit of a disconnect between what you have now and what you had back then. But the issue is you're probably not leaning into that side of the conversation more so than it just comes across as cheap drama at that instance. Now, to be fair, though, I'm kind of in this weird and awkward place where I don't think it's inherently a bad idea to have the protagonist of the previous generation be something of a deadbeat. I don't think that's inherently a bad idea.
No, yeah, true.
I think what bothers people, though, is really how this is done more than anything else. Like, this might sound controversial depending on where we go. Another good example of this is Legend of Korra. A lot of folks don't like the idea that Aang came across as a deadbeat father. I'm gonna be straight with this one. I don't mind it for one reason. There's a good justification as to why Aang put all of his attention within Tenzin than all of his other children. Because as far as he's concerned, the legacy of the Air Nomads basically ended when his master and all his other people died. He's still there, yes, but he has no other way to carry himself forward. He has all of these children. You have an earthbender, a waterbender, and that seems to be the end of it. But not Tenzin. Tenzin is the exception. He's the one child that can likely carry the legacy forward. So it only makes sense why he put all of his love and attention on Tenzin, because that is the only / best way in order for the Air Nomad's legacy to continue at that point on. So a deadbeat father in these kind of tales is not something that I inherently think is a bad thing. And even some parents will tell you, even though they don't like to admit it, they're going to have a favorite child somewhere. So if anything, that can add to the drama.
Yeah,
that can really add to the drama. So, like I said, I'm kind of in that weird place where I don't think it was a bad plot element. In fact, it's one of the only things about Korra that I actually liked, strangely enough.
Yeah, no, I in that term, I totally, like, I literally, my issue with Naruto is not even that. It's like, that makes perfect sense. It actually, if anything, it pays a lot of homage to the character, Aang. Like, this is the guy who literally refused to kill the Fire Lord, who everyone told him to kill because it would go against his teachings as an Air Nomad. So of course, once he had someone who can actually bring on that legacy, that would be his blind spot, because it was almost his blind spot in the show. It's consistent to who he is. It pays homage to who he is. It actually respects who he is. In Naruto, on the other hand, it just doesn't add up. It just feels like it was drama. Like it's like it's like 5 steps back to who the character he was and his trauma and how he, because let's be real, like a lot of main characters, this is nothing new, but like Naruto's biggest trauma was not having his parents. Like that was his thing. And you find when people have something they contend against, they will overcorrect to trying to do better, especially the good people. They're trying to correct it. Sometimes they'll overcorrect. So I feel like, at least in Naruto 10 sense, if he would have had a family drama, it would have been for the opposite reason. It just didn't feel justified in this case. Other than that, having drama and that stuff is perfectly fine. That was my main
The last thing I want to mention before I pass the torch, I don't want to ramble too long. Last thing to mention, I don't think it's inherently a bad idea for Naruto to be a deadbeat either, personally. Like, the problem is he made the point of becoming Hokage, but there was no plans for him to become a father explicitly. If you really think about it, at that point, the position that he has inevitably is going to draw him away from his family. So, in this case, what you end up having now is you have a character who had all the ambition in the world and he's finally there, but there are aspects of that life that he could never consider because of how young he was at the time. So now that we have this degree of a quote-unquote deadbeat, if you ask me, I just think that just makes sense on a grounded writing level. So it's definitely frustrating to see, especially since the cycle of being without your parents does repeat. But like I said, there is a disconnect between what you can have in the current and the prior. So you might want... The main character may not be able to at least provide what he managed to get when he was younger, but the fact remains that Naruto is still there for his child in some meaningful way. Yeah, the clones thing is a bit cheap, but at the end of the day, what you... Oh dear God! I am just not here today.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm not here today. I want to let me pass this to Don for now. Like, I think the problem is that I'm just not very much into Boruto or Naruto, so I am really stretching things a bit.
Yeah, no worries. And actually, to be fair to you, and to be fair to you, when Naruto did what he did, it was like to be a Hokage is meant to be like the family of the whole village. So that was kind of thing. So in that term, it works, but then I think how it goes about doing it just doesn't. The drama, how it reaches that didn't feel contrived. But anyway, I'm gonna step off Boruto because that wasn't like I didn't want to. I don't want to chew on the head too long. I guess like a good example. I think the reason why I brought up just like this was just like the bad examples of why it doesn't feel right is because I felt they don't pay homage to their character, and I think it's mainly because of the lack of confidence in their own character. Because Boruto is essentially the writers on here essentially not the same writer, so it's that lack of confidence. I think Cobra Kai though, I won't go too much deal again because I don't want to get into the nitty and gritty of it. But I think what it does really well is it has the previous generation, and they are still on the journey, because I think things come in cycles. Just because you're at the end of the journey and you've completed your journey, it doesn't mean that there's nothing else to learn.
It's never too old to have a character arc.
Yeah, and what I like about it is I think it's really really clever with Cobra Kai is they will have the character arc, but it always kind of harkens back down to the lessons they already learned. So they are changing, but if anything, it kind of reinforces who they already are. I won't go because honestly, I say definitely just watch Cobra Kai. It's really good. So it does this thing where they go through a character arc, but then you realize the lesson they learned was something that they already had in them. They already had it in them, but it wasn't. I guess it wasn't tested or put to the forefront. But the way it kind of packages it shows. It kind of feels like it was already there. It was just a matter of either remembering the lesson again, because there was some times where there was things that happened, and then he remembers some teaching and realized, hey, like this whole time, So
it's sort of like it's back to like the reverence of like your cast and
So then it comes back
with like particularly with Cobra Kai, the way they use Mr. Miyagi, even though they can't bring him back because the actual actor died. He's you still feel his presence there. So those of you who hasn't seen Cobra Kai, Mr. Miyagi is essentially the the sort of wise old man of the movies, and he's the one who teaches Danny.
He like Yoda. That's it.
Yes. He is Yoda. He's a real life Yoda. He is actually a real life Yoda.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, sort of the reverence in which it sort of gives him.
Mm.
Anyway, I'll leave it at that because just want to give someone else a chance to talk.
Yeah.
I think it's follow the list. I think.
Okay, cool. I mostly covered my point anyway. So, who? Cool.
I think it's Dawn, right?
Yeah,
But Wilson can't talk because he noise. It's because of noise. So.
Okay, no worries.
pass the torch to
Hi.
Dawn.
Hey.
I was just gonna kind of build on the things that I heard about Korra. So I think another aspect of just next gen storytelling that's really important, that I think that is the biggest reason why I think Korra failed as a story, is to appreciate that your audience has grown with you. So with Naruto to Boruto, a lot of us when we were watching Naruto, we were kids around the same age of Naruto, if not even younger, some of us, and we
Yeah,
kind of
probably
grew
not
up with the
much
show. Yeah, so when you're looking at new generation series, yes, we're not growing up with it, but we feel like we're watching someone who we grew up with as children. And I think that a big part of the reason why so many people get very frustrated with some next gen stories, especially with Korra, for example, is the fact that in some strange ways, Korra as a series feels less mature than Avatar, The Last Airbender did. And I think a big part of that is because the focus was in the wrong places. There was a lot of focus on romance, there was a lot of focus on characters, but these characters weren't developed enough to carry a story yet. So I'd say that something that a lot of people miss out with in terms of next generation stories is appreciating that the audience has gotten older. And that's not a bad thing, and it's not a great thing either. I think it's pretty neutral because some people use it as an opportunity to cover heavier subjects. Some people use it as an opportunity to, try and go down, memory lane, kind of give you more nostalgic things. But I personally think that is a big part of what Korra. Because when I watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, because I went to go and read into some of the comics that happened after it. That's part of the reason why I said read. So sorry about that. But anyway, so when I watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, it felt far more mature than Korra. Korra felt like another one of those little shitty kind of teenage sitcom kind of shows, which isn't bad in entirety, but I think it would be better suited for another story. It doesn't feel like something that matches Avatar's tone, language, ideas, its world. So I definitely think that is a big part of it. Another part of the reason why I think that Korra failed as a story to a lot of people, not to everyone, but a reason why is also because of the lack of respect for pre-established lore. So in the universe of Avatar: The Last Airbender, the lore was very loose. There were certain things that we knew of, but we didn't fully understand, and that was fine. But I think what happened in The Legend of Korra was the fact that they over-explained. We didn't need to know the origin of the Avatar. We enjoyed the Avatar because we knew little about them. They're such an innocuous and strange figure. There's so much enigma around the idea of someone who reincarnates into a different tribe every cycle. It's such an interesting premise. But then when you essentially, I don't know how to say this without sounding incredibly rude, so sorry to anyone who's listening to this, especially those who are religious, but they kind of Christianize the idea of very Buddhist concepts, which does bother me a little bit as someone who, because I was brought up Catholic, right? And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I can quote the Bible, but one thing that really irritated me about The Legend of Korra is the way they kind of Christianize this idea of an absolute good and an absolute evil, when in Buddhism and in a lot of Asian religions, the idea of an absolute good and absolute evil is not actually as prevalent as you would think it is. In a lot of these religions, there is a lot of chaos, and that chaos isn't good nor evil. Some of it is just neutral destruction that exists. It is a force that cannot be controlled and is barely even understood by other mythos and other gods in their own religions. Yeah, and that was such a big part of Avatar. The idea of these crazy, scary spirits like Ko the Face Stealer. This guy steals people's faces if they make an expression at him. He was terrifying. But now we've gotten, instead of having interesting spirits like Ko the Face Stealer, or like the moon spirits with the two koi fish
Yeah, the
at
koi fish.
the end of book one. Yeah, instead of having these interesting enigmatic spirits who felt like they had a place in the world, we have a dark avatar who's just made of all the bad things that the avatar doesn't do or does do or should do. There's this kind of weird Christianizing of these concepts, which I think kind of strangely simplifies them too much, which is kind of interesting because if you know anything about Christian theology, it is not simple at all. But the idea of making something appear so black and white and essentially disrespecting the previous cycle's law is kind of upsetting to me because that was one of my biggest disappointments with Korra and my biggest frustration with watching book two, which I'm sure some of you might have felt if you were watching it, where we got these, gigantic avatars shooting beams at each other in the middle of the ocean. Like, what happened? This series once had all of these very interesting concepts, which, to be honest, aren't that hard to build upon. The idea of, martial arts and how we fit in Eastern religions into creating an interesting universe. And then we're now going to paint it that this was actually the first avatar was this guy, and this really good, inherently good spirit just entered his body and now he just reincarnates. And I'm just like, sometimes I feel like the story would have benefited a lot by not telling the audience that. I think this could be a matter of telling too much and feeling the need to over-explain things, because not to try and beat a dead horse here, but Naruto had the same issue at the end of the war arc. None of us needed to know the origin of ninjutsu. We didn't need to know how it came to be. We didn't need to know about the Otsutsuki's clan. We didn't need to know this stuff, and it kind of ruins the mysticism of the series, and it also sets up the newer series for failure. And I think that if you want to make a good next gen series, from what I said before and also now, respect the previous generation, but you do not need to revere them. There is a very big difference between respect and reverence. Darren, you can pay homage to the previous cast, but don't make us feel stupid for them not being the main characters. I don't know how else to explain that in a way that won't sound a bit ridiculous, but I'm sure you can understand what I mean.
No. It doesn't sound ridiculous in the slightest. Because
awesome.
I think just to kind of add to what you're saying before James comes in, I think I had the same problem, because another issue with next gens is that they feel the need to expand on the prior gen or some.
Yeah, I think there's not actually much reason for that, because some of us we don't. It's not that we don't want expansion. It's not that we don't need expansion. It's the fact that your world should be big enough for you to tell multiple stories in. If you're having the need to try and expand your world in a way that doesn't even feel naturalistic to your series, I think you need to take a step back and consider what you can do with the building blocks you already have, rather than trying to build new towers and then knock them down.
Because then
use what you have instead of making new stuff, basically.
Because then the next question now becomes, where was this before, basically?
Yeah, and that's a big problem as well, because so one of the things that I think a lot of stories, especially stories that are like Shonen Jump stories, i.e. stories that come out, are serialized while they're essentially conceptualized at the same time, is that they struggle with consistency. So there are certain things that series struggle with consistency-wise when it comes to this idea should have been presented beforehand. Where was this earlier? Very brief example. Also, another series with a next gen story that's actually currently it's not next gen. It's more like after, but think of it as a new game plus, I guess. But yeah, anyway. So in Fairy Tail, at the very end of Fairy Tail, it has a war arc. Whoop-de-doo. I guess it's a shonen after all. And in it, there is a basic. Okay, so there's a black wizard Zeref. He's supposed to be this kind of scary, enigmatic figurehead of this evil guild of demons, right? And in a previous arc, these demons are all defeated, and Fairy Tail disbands. So, about a year after Fairy Tail disbands and they've all broken up, they're trying to gather the gang again, and a mini arc happens. Nothing of importance happens. The arc after, however, is the final one of the series. And that one entails what happened with Zeref and what he's been doing during the years that fairy tale's been operating because this man is basically immortal. So during these years, apparently he's essentially started a country by himself. He's got his own legion of bad guys behind him, and we heard no mention of this in the entire fairy tale. And that's not that this is a sign of things not necessarily being established soon enough to make it pay off later. If we'd had some build up, so for example, even build up in Avatar, the idea of there being a bad Avatar out there rather than one being newly born would have been a really interesting idea. The idea that there was someone who was born out there who had similar abilities to the Avatar, except they didn't have good intentions for the world, or they weren't treated as a balance, and then maybe showing that person in the previous series beforehand. But you can tell that Korra wasn't planned out initially because a lot of the things that happen in it feel very unfounded. That's a big problem in it. You need to have something that feels earned, something that feels founded, something that feels somewhat established, so that there can be a very clear through line from what you showed us beforehand and the end result. If there is no line between these 2 points, you cannot consider that a finished story element because it's not. It's incomplete. You need to go back and consider how you can make that line very clear to see. It doesn't need to be predictable, but it needs to be understandable. And I would say that Korra definitely did suffer from that as well.
Yeah.
Sorry for the rambling, but I've been consuming a lot of next gen stories. I'd honestly never thought of JoJo as one, but I do consume a lot of them now that I think about it.
Castlevania is one too.
Oh yeah, true.
No, don't spoil me on it. I haven't watched it yet.
Yeah, me neither.
Oh, is it?
So I guess it's now
Okay.
Shonen Strike,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, so it's like a quick one. It's one where you haven't sort of. I feel we've sort of skirted around, because we've always talked about the next generation of like being directly related to the main cast. But if you look at like a lot of these next gen stories, they always feature characters that have no relation to any of the cast. They're sort of their own thing, and yeah, qualities of these characters definitely do wax and wane. Like I'm gonna brush Boruto aside, but yeah, Korra absolutely does. Like with Mako and Bolin, I didn't mind them, but and Asami, like I didn't mind them, but they weren't really. They weren't that well developed, but they also don't. They're sort of like characters that have no relation to people in the past. They're just they are their own people. They've got no one to sort of look back on. But not that, and obviously like Mako in particular is has an absolutely scuffed character arc because of the its god awful romance. I think like that's an important thing with like next gen is like it's not just about like the the fruits of the old gen's loins. Sorry for that horrid analogy. But sort of you also need like other people around. So I've actually like I've mentioned Gears of War with the sort of son of Marcus Phoenix, JD. And he is only the protagonist of Gears 4. Gears 5, the main protagonist is one of his squad mates, a girl called Kat, who I won't spoil anything with her story, but I'll just say she doesn't really have that much connection or initially with any of the cast, and then and same with the third member of the new heroes, Del, who Del is my bro. Like no one messes with my bro. But he's not the son of say Cole. He doesn't have any relation to Baird. In fact, he didn't know who Baird was until JD basically pointed out that he's the guy who made the boss that had been trying to kill us. He sort of is like his own character. Like there's like no, and acts as sort of the kind of glue that holds the squad together, sort of like JD's buddy, and then sort of the main support for Kat for what she goes through in her character arc. So and sort of also like going back to Cobra Kai, like you have like characters that have absolutely no relation to the previous cast. So few good examples. I've mentioned Miguel. He is like he's the student of Johnny Lawrence, but is no way related to them. And then you also have Eli and Dimitri, the sort of like the nerds of the school, and like they have no connection. And these are like, and just through the writing of their own personal stories, which is influenced by like Daniel and Johnny, but they sort of go through their own things. Hawk's story in particular is really well done, going from this sort of bullied, timid boy to being a bully himself, to sort of trying to redeem himself, to having his entire spirit crushed, to then finally realizing who he is. And it was one that I found it was one that was sort of it felt like it was earned, like it was well written, it was well paced. You had times where you really hated him, but then you sort of it eventually like came together in sort of a way that sort of not like, I wouldn't say like absolving him, but also basically it's like, even if like it was removed from, say, like anything that happened in if it was removed from like the Karate Kid, it would still be a damn good story if it was something else. And I think like that's how sort of to approach it. Like, could this work in something else?
Yeah. Yeah, that was...
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, honestly, that was like my biggest point I felt about this. Let me just see, because I'll make sure I'm not talking before someone else.
No, go ahead. Like, I think I was having problem where I was kind of rambling.
My phone is so slow. I had this up a second ago. Let's double check.
Right. So after
It would be me.
yeah, Echoes,
Yeah.
Torches to Echoes.
Okay. So I guess kind of I'm gonna just slightly shift it a little bit. Because in a way we're all talking about different series, right? I actually want to talk about two as well. I'll first talk about Yashahime first. Is an example of a bad next gen, essentially. Bad is a kind of a strong word, but I use it because of how it was created. So, as you know, Yashahime was not originally a series made by what's her name? By the original creator of Inuyasha, essentially. Rumiko. It's not by Rumiko Takahashi. Rather, it was created with her assistance a little bit, but essentially it's an original story as a way to make money off of a legacy title. This has been a sort of like an ongoing trend, like with a series like Fruits Basket, for example, like some older anime getting reboots because they make money, and also Rurouni Kenshin as well. And because of that, the show fundamentally it's not perfect, but it's definitely very flawed in the sense of why the main girls exist. So essentially, Yashahime follows the children of the main cast of Inuyasha. Specifically, that Inuyasha and I keep thinking Kikyo, but that's not her name.
Kagome.
Kagome and Inuyasha have one daughter, and then Sesshomaru and Rin have twins. So the slight issue is that Sesshomaru and Rin having twins is slightly controversial because of the fact that it's can be borderline grooming.
Considering she's only like 14 or 16 at the time, I believe.
Yeah, because Sesshomaru can be seen as a parental / guardian figure to her, and it wasn't considered romantic until this series existed. Inuyasha was not considered romantic. It was considered, for the most part, platonic as much as possible. So it kind of feels like casual because the main two girls are the twins of Sesshomaru and Rin. And it feels slightly contrived. And the fact that the whole enemy is kind of like Inuyasha's father like made like an enemy of blah 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 of some sort of dude, and he's like angry about a variety of things. And then there's supposedly this death comet that's coming on the way, so they're trying to get a hold of these rainbow pearls, which is the successor of the Shikon Jewel, which is the enemy of all things. And in a way, it's not like a terrible concept of revisiting the world of Inuyasha using the children of the original generation. Even though the original generation is oddly, some of them are like AFK for reasons, which isn't exactly the most well explained either. So you kind of get a feeling that this series was just made for the sake of money rather than for the sake of quality or actually caring about what happened. Though you could tell that people do generally care because they revisit some of the older villains, talk about connections with like Inuyasha's like father and his, various relationships with other yokai, blah blah blah. It's nice to see also the what happened to some of the characters who aged like 10, 15 years, what that type of thing. However, I would say it's kind of weak fundamentally in certain ways, to a point of it kind of being seen as rather cheesy. So that I wouldn't say it's the best example of a next gen story, but it exists because of money. Anyway, and then the second one I'll say is a relatively good example that covers one of the reasons Dawn mentioned before about how every generation after the first should have a reason to exist, essentially, or something that makes them unique. And I'm going to quickly cover the brief concept of Pokemon Adventure / Special. They're not because every Pokemon has like 15 weather regions, right? But for every generation, which is represented by the games, right? They have pretty much, you have the main protagonists, which are Red, Green, and Blue, which are the main trio from Kanto. There's a fourth named Yellow, who's from the Yellow game. And then it kind of goes in sequence that they're the oldest, and then the people from Johto are the next oldest, and then after that you get people from Hoenn, which is next oldest, and then it goes in order, essentially. They're all differentiated by at least a year from each other, which also means that the oldest are the Kanto, always. And then it goes further, like, if you go to, like, Sinnoh, then you have a difference of, like, at least 4 or 5 years. Generally, right? So, in a way, this is because the manga changes every generation or every region by having a new cast of characters who are the protagonists, and they have their own story based off their respective games. So, in a way, it didn't have to be, like, a whole generational thing, essentially. But it does create an interesting relationship between these characters about they have kind of like a kohai senpai relationship, upperclassman, underclassman, where they can refer to the older generation as their senpai and the younger as their kohai, and they could sometimes intersect every once in a while. Like in there's an arc called the Emerald arc based on Pokemon Emerald, where you get all the previous generations essentially gather up and go in like a final battle. Which is pretty cool. So, in a way, that is a good example of essentially next gen as in next generation of protagonists rather than children. But it does follow the concept of every generation does something unique because there's intention of the protagonist having a certain ability that differentiates them from the rest, and the general progression of every group represents a different region of Pokemon. So, I always thought that was a super interesting way of doing next gen that doesn't involve essentially children, but a next gen of protagonists instead.
Yeah, it's like in the same world, but like because it moves on and the characters still exist in the same world. There is this kind of passing of the torch sort of thing. So yeah, definitely agree with
because I think one of the misconceptions on this one, just to kind of jump on that for a second, is that the next generation explicitly has to follow the children of the previous line. But it could just happen to be a character that was affected by the actions of the first generation. So it doesn't necessarily explicitly have to be a bloodline affair. It can just be we were somehow involved in this in some shape or form, whether or not we were just some kid on the street who saw what you were doing, or we saw a side of the protagonist that most people are just not aware of, and then the story can end up following those lines instead. So
no, yeah, 100%, yeah, definitely, because even in Cobra Kai, a lot like kind of like Lester was mentioning, a lot of them characters, a bunch of the characters weren't blood related to the original characters. There are blood related characters in there, but they stand out in their own. They have their own story. I think that was honestly, I think my term was just basically a closing thought, basically based around that is like, yeah, fair enough. With dealing with next generation story, there is this level of reverence you got to give to the previous generation. You basically got to give respect to what's happened previously, show the consequence of what happened, and let that kind of bleed into the next generations on a good way of doing it. But I think essentially as well, you just gotta write. I think you gotta treat the story. It's a balance, okay? It's a balance. You gotta play relevant to the original cast, but essentially you gotta treat the story like it's like if someone were to not have known about the previous generation and didn't never watched their show, never became a fan of them, and they just came in on the next generation, they should be able to get a whole experience and the whole journey from that generation without having to go back. Like, I think essentially, if there was a goal to write, it's kind of hitting that balance, because at the end of the day, the next gen story is you're following the main characters are not the previous generation, so there's reverence, but you just essentially you gotta write it like you gotta write like the like yeah the yeah there
yeah like yeah
you gotta write like they have never seen
so sort of like it's kind of like making because like I think like what Cobra Kai does like is, while it benefits if you've seen the original movies, they do sort of like truncated clips of the old film. So you would at least, and they do sort of explain like some of the bits of the story beats, and like specifically though from the POV of the person doing it. So like with Johnny sort of telling Miguel in the first season sort of his beef with LaRusso absolutely was sort of from his perspective, even though it like used like clips of like the old film, like it was still like of his perspective. So it's like a case where like you can absolutely like watch it on its own. It benefits from knowing it, but it is sort of more its own thing that a new generation can definitely like sit down, watch, and enjoy what is there without feeling like they've lost anything significant.
Wait, so are you guys basically saying that you think new generation stories should be able to be enjoyed as standalone stories as well as a story that is next generation?
Yeah,
I could actually see that, and I can actually agree with that to a point, because if you ask me, going into something knowing full well it's a follow-up can turn some people off, because they're going to feel obligated to see where it all began. But a story that stands on its own merits should be able to encourage you to go back on your own time if you really want to. Like, for example, there are some games and some stories that do get released over here in America in which we never really got the previous version of it. However, even if we never got the previous version, we played it enough to the point where we're like, we would like to see the story that came before this. Now, I can't think of a good example off the top of my head right now, but this idea of getting a sequel first, not knowing it's a sequel, only to play the first game, you end up appreciating what you have in the sequel 10 times more. I guess a literal example that I can think of is Star Ocean 2, The Second Evolution. That game, we got that one first. We never got the first one at all. And the main character of that game just so happens to be the son of one of the major protagonists of the first ones. But the amazing thing, like I said, is you do not need to play First Departure at all to understand what Second Evolution is about. It is a next-gen story, but you wouldn't even think about it because you didn't even know there was a story before it unless the game outright told you in its title, The Second Story. You do not need the first story to understand the second. If you ask me, the strongest of tales can stand on their own, and they will encourage you to go back to read the previous tale.
Yeah, my case, like I started with 3, and that had no relation to anything that happened in like 1 or 2, and and then the one that came after that, which was Lost Hope, that was sort of the beginning of what will become. That was sort of like its prequel to the first game, set like years ago, with the only relation being a character called Kenny.
Other
than that, it can essentially like stand on its own 2 feet.
What's the name of it? Xenoblade Chronicles. Am I saying it right? Is that?
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, that's actually like specifically Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Because 1 and 2 sort of are their own standalone games, with 3 being the sort of sequel to both those games, but it has like completely different casts. So the cast of like Noah, Mio, Lance. Oh god, I can't believe I've forgotten all their names already. But yeah, like, and that's also the case there. It would benefit if you've played the previous games, especially like it has only 2 returning characters in the initial game with I'm gonna say Melia and Nia, but you can absolutely enjoy it for what it is, and will definitely like prompt you to sort of go back and play the original ones, which you can do because like they're now all on the Switch. The one different one would be the sort of the DLC chapter of 3, which is the Future Redeemed. That one you really do need to have played both. Well, for one, you do need to have played Xenoblade Chronicles 3 to the end, and then you'd also, on top of that, would need both the first and second game, as it sees the return of Shulk and Rex, as well as I'm not sure it's probably a bit of a spoiler, so I'm actually not going to mention the other one.
Yeah, might be good to keep it surface level.
Yeah, but then you'll
keep it surface level.
Yeah, but there's definitely the third game though. Definitely, it can stand on its own as its own game without sort of the context from the previous games. There is like the link to it, but it's explained like mystic enough that you don't necessarily need that background knowledge in order to understand what's going on. That being said, it absolutely gets very weird near the end, but hey, I love weirdness.
Yeah, actually, I got I guess a kind of follow-up question to regards to Next Gen, because it's just I'm kind of like crunching out in my mind. Some of the things I've kind of, when we're having this conversation, is it seemed like with Next Gen, I feel like the world that it's not just the next gen of the characters. I think obviously character important. You probably could do this with a world that's not as, I guess, deep. But I think like, how important do you feel like the world, like how important do you think the world is to making the next gen work like authentically? Do you feel it's like really important? Because I think at least some of the issues I'm hearing is about like the like with Avatar from Last Airbender to Korra, where they basically simplified the mysticism of the world, and then it just gives the next gen less to kind of really, I guess, explore. And I'm thinking how important is that? Like, do you think it's a big factor? I think it's a small factor. It depends on the story.
Yeah, it depends, because like sorry to beat a dead horse, but Boruto. So I am honestly not a fan of Naruto's world, especially near the end. So I feel like it's not one that has like it didn't really have like the legs to sort of support another world and like continuing that on top of that, especially with like the anime and like even the manga sort of going into more like Shin Megami Tensei veins than like what I've saw in like Naruto. One Korra, the Legend of Korra, though, the world of the Last Airbender, though, absolutely does stand up on its own, and like I'm probably one of the few people who would say I like Korra. Not that I think it's think it's flawless like the first series, because it absolutely is not. But like, because you mentioned like the one thing like that series though I feel does do well in like world building is sort of you see like the evolution of technology, and then sort of like well it doesn't have like the best, well it's like not the most consistent story ever. You have like really good threats that emerge that are of relation to this new world. So with the first one, the the issue of like the non-benders, like those who can't use bending, essentially being sort of always like under the thumb of those who can, and then you have this society where even like non-benders can essentially rise above normal benders, and then you have this group basically saying that the time for benders is over. And then fourth season, I think, has what I argue is one of the best villains I've seen in TV, Kavira. And sort of like that, sort of like, and it sort of like builds off like the sort of Earth Kingdom. So
some repercussions
like
for that
in the
one,
first,
correctly, yeah.
Yeah, because essentially in like the Last Airbender, sort of depicts the Earth Kingdom as this like strong bastion against the Fire Nation, but then you also like underneath it you see its seedy underbelly, its corruption. And season 3 of Legend of Korra is where that's sort of brought to the surface, to the point where it was enough to literally bring the entire kingdom down and cause a outright civil war. And then what emerged from that was a woman who gained complete control, and then basically declared that it was this monarchy that had ruined our nation. New order must be in place, and like for all like. And what I like about particularly Kavira is that she never ever came off as like a diabolical tyrant or this. Well, she did, but not.
Yeah, I was about to say objection on
like,
that one.
Yeah, sorry, like evil. I meant like evil for the sake of being evil. Like I.
Okay, yeah.
Like quote from Metal Gear, she was a patriot. Like she went to absolutely horrendous. She did absolutely horrible things. You could absolutely see like what she was doing it for, like, and it was a belief she had like right up until like even after she was beaten, she still always thought about the Earth, or the Earth Kingdom, Empire, Republic, beyond anything else.
Actually, so Don just mentioned something interesting. We can look into the next topic, and Kavira is actually a very good jumping off point for this.
Oh yeah.
Nate,
okay, yeah.
Introduce it. I'd like to kind of explain the difference between the two of them if I can, but you're the host, so you should introduce the topic.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so the next topic we have is about sympathy and empathy. And well, the rest of it was I'll go through sympathy and empathy first, and then we'll go through the next part because my phone is so slow. But like in terms of writing, you want to like help the readers actually care about the characters, understand like what they're going through, and you know relate to what they're going through. So in like on an emotional level. So and like that's essentially what a story boils down to. Is you're following the story through a character's, through a character's shoes, and you're trying to like, you either sympathize or empathize with that plight or the struggle they're going through. And I guess at least because the topic had a bit more to it, but I think what was kind of going down here in the comments was the difference between sympathy and empathy. How I've understood it was sympathy is you sympathize with the person. It means you understand, I guess, almost logically what they're going through. You understand, like, okay, they're going through this because of X, Y, and Z for whatever reason. The thing they're going through it's happening because of this. This has happened because they've I don't know, they've lost their home. The home was burnt down, and now the reason why they're really angry is because they found out the person who done it. Like, you understand in that sense. And empathizing is almost kind of getting into the almost seeing it through in their shoes and actually going through the moment to moment emotions of that experience. That's the kind of best way I'll explain it. I think I actually think about it. It's kind of making me think about the difference between a plot and a story, where a plot is kind of, you know, this happened because of this and this happened because of that, and because of that, this, you know, we get this result. There's a good experience for it, and then in the story, there is the why of it. There is this, like, okay, plot is the king the king died, and then the queen died, and then the story is the king died of heart failure, and the queen died of depression or something like that. It's the how and the why of it. That's how I understood the difference.
Well, the two terms are very close to each other in more ways than one, but the typical definition between them is empathy, at least if we're using the dictionary example, leans into the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. And sympathy refers to feelings of pity and sorrow for someone else's misfortune. So the way how I see it, sympathy is basically the common understanding between misfortune and bad situations, or at least what struggles someone is going through. And empathy is just your inherent ability to understand and at least share the feelings of the other person at that. The definitions are roughly close. However, sympathy is something that is gained via mutual understanding. Empathy has to be there from the start, basically. So, like, whenever you hear something about, like, you need to have empathy for other people, basically this means that you need to have some understanding going into people. Sympathizing is basically the post. So it brings something within the definitions. Basically, empathy is basically like pre-knowledge, and sympathy is post-knowledge, if that makes any sense. That's what it means in this case. And I wanted to bring up this topic mainly because at the end of the day, when we're reading stories about a character, we want to be able to sympathize with them, but our ability to empathize with them, however, comes from how we are able to interact with the world and the character themselves. Like, we come in wanting to empathize, but do we really sympathize with them at the end of the day? That's, if you ask me, is up to the writer's credence and the writer's capability, as well as their integrity. So, with that said, I want to throw the topic out further so folks can comment on it from there. Now that we got the definitions laid in stone for now.
Okay.
Okay, I'll use this opportunity to speak, I guess. Sorry for those who are tired of hearing me at this point. Haha. Anyway,
you were amazing. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Oh my god! Thank you.
Actually, I think it's fine. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, you're doing good.
So one thing I will say, that is, I think, kind of important is that empathy isn't something that is inherent. It's something that we learn. So empathy and sympathy are things that are very often misconstrued with each other, and I think a big part of the reason why is because a lot of people use these things interchangeably when they mean something different. It's kind of like the difference between affect and affect, and it's also similar to the difference of kind of saying, you know, I envy someone and I'm jealous of someone, because envy and jealousy are actually two very different emotions. Jealousy is fearing something will be taken away from you, and envy is wanting what someone else has. It's part of the reason why one is often considered part of the umbrella of the other, and not that they're two separate things, even though they are two separate things. Anyway, so empathy is something that's learned, which often means that you cannot rely on your audience to be able to empathize with your characters all the time as a writer. To have your characters be vehicles for empathy is very, very difficult because it relies on you being able to tap into the inner experiences of your readership, which is just not possible. Everyone can relate with the idea of waking up in the morning, but not everyone can empathize with the groggy feeling that people feel because it's not something that evokes that emotion. It's not something that evokes that feeling inside of someone. To be able to evoke sympathy in your reader is also quite easy in comparison to empathy, but quite hard to do without tiring an audience out. So I'm sure you guys have all heard of this expression before, the idea of misery porn, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so we've all read a series, or at least glanced at a series that is filled with misery porn. Also, sorry, just give me a moment. So, one series I would describe as misery porn is Magical Girl Sight or Magical Girl Raising Project. Both of them kind of have a bit of misery porn in them. I'd say Magical Girl Sight is probably quite a bit worse. So, the reason why these series are regarded to this day is that the author tries so hard to make a protagonist or even another character's lives miserable to make you feel pity for them. But there is a certain threshold that every single human being has, regardless of your ability to empathize, of how much misery you can watch someone go through before you stop caring. And if you've used TV tropes before, I believe they call this I think it's like the idea of having like a moral black hole, the idea of like a moral event horizon, and that some of us kind of reach that point when we hear someone has such a miserable life. You know, the idea of someone having a miserable time, like they lost their parents, that's devastating. It's painful, and I'm sure there are people who can empathize with that. I personally can't because I have both of my parents. I'm very fortunate, but when we hear someone's lost their parents, then their dog died, then their granddad got run over in front of them, and then, oh my god, their clothes are wet, and then their everything they've done has just failed in their life. There's a certain point where we stop caring. And a part of us not caring anymore is the lack of relatability. So the lack of agency that we see the person who is subject to all of this bad thing having in their life. When someone has no agency, it is hard to empathize because we, in our agency, our ability to choose what happens to us, our ability to exercise our so-called free will, because we have that ability, we are able to make decisions that lead to good and bad outcomes. When you don't have the option to lead into that and everything around you is what decides it, there's a certain point where people stop caring about your situation because they see it as a result of your inaction rather than the action of another. So I would say a big reason why authors often struggle to evoke empathy is because they rely too much on sympathy and end up completely dulling the senses of their reader. There are so many times I've seen things in media which are sad, and I'm like, that's sad, but I don't really feel it. But then I can understand, I can feel it when I can empathize. So, sorry, I know I've been talking for a while, so I'll just try and give a really quick example. There is an anime airing right now, and it falls under the genre of Iyashikare, which is basically the idea of healing anime that makes you feel good after a shit day at work. And this anime, I think, is called My New Boss is Goofy. Super cute anime, by the way. If you haven't watched it, you really should consider watching it. It's really cute. Anyway, so there's a scene where this man, the main character, is fucking miserable. He's just left work. He has an awful job. He works at a black company, so he has a miserable time working under the most exploitative people out there. And he sees this advert, and it's something that should be basic, and anyone else would have seen it and they wouldn't have seen it as something important. But it's amidst what looks like a starless sky, there is one star that is brighter than anything else out there. And when he sees that, he sees a moment of hope. He glimpses into the future and he sees something that makes him believe that there is something worth living for. And he's not going to find it if he keeps working in this job that he's still at. So he quits his job, he leaves the exploitative company, and he finds something new. And while not many of us can sympathize with the experience, i.e., we can't just sit there and look at it and go, oh, that's really sweet. Some of us can't see it that way, but a lot of us can relate to the feeling of feeling like you're in somewhere it is incredibly dark, and having someone, something, no matter how small or significant it is, be what got you out of it. So many of us have struggled with our emotions and feelings. And yet there was something small in that show, that moment, where this man turns around and sees an ad that changed his life, an advert of all things, and goes, I can't live like this anymore. I can empathize with that because I've gone through something similar. I've had a chance where I've sat there and spent days of my life in bed, which I guess is a bit TMI, so sorry about that, guys. But anyway, I've had moments in my life where I've been very, very depressed and I've completely just done nothing. And then I saw one thing that made me go, I don't want to live like this anymore. And I reached out and got help as a result. And yeah, maybe it sounds like a very typical epiphany idea, but that moment in that show that aired a few weeks ago made me empathize because I could see myself in that. But I could also understand it because I'd done it before and other people had done it before. Evoking that feeling as a writer is incredibly difficult. And I will never chastise someone for struggling with that. But what I will chastise someone for is relying so much on an audience's ability to sympathize that they use it as a crutch. My biggest suggestion to any writer, especially those who are listening to this, would be understand your experiences. When people say write what you know, this is what they're talking about. They're not talking about writing about someone walking down the street. They're talking about write about the things that emotionally resonate with you. Think about what resonates with you. Think about what's made you happy, what's made you angry, what's made you cry, what's made you jump around in joy. And try to channel it through someone else's eyes. And then understand, why does it make anyone else feel that way? That's your sympathy talking. But your empathy talking is, this is the way I felt, I want other people to feel it too. So that's the advice I would give to anyone who's wondering what the difference between sympathy and empathy is from the point of view of a writer.
Sorry, it's okay to just interject real quick. Go
ahead. Honestly, I'm done.
Before Hex starts, just because of your topic, right? It reminded me of this manga I really like, where it's called The Cat Propose. It's essentially the idea of an overworked office worker pretty much is on the edge of karoshi, which is death, right? But he is saved by a kabuki performance. And as someone who's great, one of the great, like, if you have been depressed in something similar, or have felt like you truly were at the end or getting close to what you consider to be end of whether your life or your circumstances or something, or feel like there's nowhere to go, but then you find this rope, essentially a rope that's like hanging, and then you just desperately try to grab it. It's essentially that feeling of you being so depressed, but you really want to save yourself, but you don't find yourself able to, and then you find that rope and you're like, I got it, let's grab this before it goes away. It's a feeling that you can't really completely understand unless if you face it yourself. And people who can truly feel for or show that circumstance to a degree that when you go through the first time, you're just so moved by it. And I'm like, that's something that is not easy to do. It only can be done if you've experienced it yourself. So, yep. All right. Keep going. It's Hex.
I guess it will be mine.
Yeah.
No, but I don't know. You gave such a good discussion. I don't know if I can follow up with it.
I think this format might
Honestly,
be a little...
anything you have to say will be really good. I promise you.
Yeah.
Like, don't put yourself down, okay?
No. Yeah, just try to offer what you can, man.
Yeah, no. It's this would actually, sympathy and empathy is also something that I would relate to, like character moments. I kind of mentioned it in the list of topics just now, but I won't focus on that. That we can save for another moment. But I will just talk a bit about it, which is just that, like, how do you say, especially with writing empathetic moments, or rather, in both moments, it's always about like expectations as well, of like how would you react, and then how does the character react, and sometimes in different ways. There was the latest Freerun episode, which I thought was interesting, in the sense of what was it? The latest episode. It was about like one of the characters and his brother. The older brother basically is like well known, very well loved. I don't know if you guys saw that episode. It was very recent.
Is it this week? Because I don't think I caught this week.
This week.
I haven't seen it,
okay.
but if you can explain it simple terms.
No. I'll put it in simple terms. But like we go through a backstory of this character, Stark's character, and how he's like always been weak, and he's not loved by the village because of how weak it is. The village is always run by like, oh, the strongest are the survivors. Weaker ones, we like abandon them and stuff. But he always had this older brother, and like initially when you see this older brother, you're just like, he's the one of the best in the clan, and he wears a white kind of dressed coat to indicate how strong he is, basically. And his coat is always cleaned up. Like whenever he fights monsters, the coat remains clean. No blood is on this coat. And then all of a sudden, like he sees his brother trying to practice against the dummy, and the brother like just kind of misses his stick and kind of like throws it, and like some of the dirt lands on the older brother's kind of clothing, which is white, and now it's like dirtied up. And then like in that moment, there's a brief pause. And maybe in these moments, right, like I think you would be in the little brother's kind of shoes, and you would be scared in that moment, because like sometimes we will have like older siblings, and if you mess with their gear, or if you if you destroy their bed or something like that, you kind of get scared of how will they react and stuff. And in this case, I mean, in the older brother's case, he kind of was reciprocated with a bit of like, he didn't care if it got dirtied, because he cared about his younger brother. So he was like, oh, that's fine. Like, I'll help you out with training. But like, I don't know, this minor moments, but some of that, like, I was just like, oh, is he gonna be screwed or not? And in that sense, there was a mixture of empathy there. I don't know. It's the sense of like the expectation, and you, in those expectations, you start wondering like, what would you do, and how will this character be? And and sometimes when the character reacts in an interesting way that kind of maybe aligns with what did you expect, or kind of subverts your expectation, that can also like trigger some more kind of emotional moments where you connect with them. I don't know. There's much more examples, but this was more of a recent example. I don't know.
I totally get what you're saying, because it's the it's you can, through the characters, you are able to understand yourself better through seeing their experiences of how you see how they act and thinking, oh, would have I done that? Would have I not done that? Oh, like or you see events like, oh, that's something similar to what I've been through. You know, it's that. I think that's the difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is it's like one of them is, oh, okay, I get these cause of events, and I get why you're here. But I think empathy, am I getting it mixed up? But empathy is more where the reader or watchers what's seeing it, and they reflect back on an event that is relative to that, and it kind of hits them more in a more personal level. So I think with my thoughts on that, it's actually it's a good jumping off point with what you said there is and also Dawn as well, because you brought up a really good point of just like how precarious it is to actually succeed in doing that consistently. It is not easy, because we all have the same spectrum of emotions, but we all use them for we are all unique and we're all quite different, and like what will make someone laugh in extreme case could make another person cry. Like we can watch the same thing and not react to it the same way because of our life experiences and what we've been through and just our temperament and what we've grown up to understand. So I think when it comes to empathy, I feel like one of the key things about it is when a reader comes, or a reader or watcher comes to watch the show and everything, yeah, sure, they're there to watch the characters and to see what happened, but I think ultimately when you really get down to it, they're watching it to understand more about themselves or to relate to something more about it. It goes back to them at the end of the day. When they watch a character they determine whether they like it or not, or whether it's more on what they relate to the character, what they see in themselves in that character, you know. So in a way, I think what makes a reader or a watcher like be really immersed and empathize with a character is not so much when the character is being all loud, like it's more when it's more when the character is almost, not say invisible, but it's almost when they can see themselves in the character, you know, like the stuff they see them do, and like the journey they go through. If they can pick up on things like, oh, I've been through something like this, or I've been something like this, but maybe it wasn't 100% like this, but it's almost something I've been through. It's so, and I think, and with a story, a good story good writer does, they'll have the moments, but it'll be in a tale that ebbs and flows. So it will have like I'm talking more fantasy. I have to go through like more fantasy, right? Where you'll have your big bombastic moments and your, you know, these things that just kind of happen in this world, like that makes the world immersive and interesting, because it's not like our world. But then what brings the reader back to being like really connecting to the characters and actually caring about what's happened just beyond the flashy, you know, whatever magic you got going on, is when the characters reflect their own temperament. Whether it doesn't have to be in like lockstep to they 100% agree with everything this character does. Obviously, at the end of the day, characters be their own person. We are so unique to a way where we're always gonna find something that we don't relate to. But I think for the most part, it's when they see the character and they just see a lot of the things they do, and they get it not just because it's happened in a story and they kind of get it on like a surface level. They get it because they've been through experiences like that, or relative to that. And I think that's what really kind of gels the connection with between like sympathy and empathy. I hope that makes sense. I feel like I had a better point, but I just kind of scuffed it. But yeah,
I think it generally made sense from what I can tell. I guess would it be okay if I talk next, or
yeah,
sure,
it was supposed to be you next. Yeah.
No, it's okay. I was because I think Nate was kind of jumping off of what happened earlier, so that's why I wasn't sure. But yeah, I think what you said generally made sense from what I can tell. I feel like so you somewhat repeated some previous points, but I think it generally made sense. I could generally understand what you're trying to go for. But I guess just to quickly talk about this topic as well, rather than the interjection I said before, was that I guess for me personally, when I watch a series or read a series or watch a show, for example, right, I feel like, at least anime in particular, I really want to feel for the characters, the plot. And if I feel like nothing, or I feel empty when watching a show, I don't really bother with it, because I can't feel anything. It's not what I'm looking for is truly feeling moved by a show, essentially. Whether it's like the character's plot or relatability. And I also, because of that, I also really hate when a show forces you to feel something. Because no show should force you. And I'll provide 2 examples. So a show that I really is mixed on is Violet Evergarden. Very good example of sometimes when the episodes, it's such on Violet who is learning emotions, right? But some parts can be so melodramatic that it like feels like they want you to cry, but if you do it too often, you can't cry anymore,
Because you get numb to it eventually.
Essentially, right? And that's a horrible feeling because it doesn't feel like you're feeling genuine emotion from something. But and that's the issue I have with specifically the ending movie. Does it particularly badly, and I watched it in theaters too. I was like, afterwards, I'm like, man, did I feel like I wasted my time? That type of thing, because it was like done over and over and over again, and I was like, my God, do I not enjoy watching this as much as I wanted to? And I had a feeling it was gonna be the case anyway, like because it happened before in the TV series. The one the OVAs was like fine, but you never want to feel forced, and I think that's the worst thing. Well, the second show second show, and then I'll mention two others, just briefly, is there's a show also by Kyonu, which is called Tsurune, which is and Nate will go after me. Is essentially Tsurune is about this group of boys and who do Japanese style archery. But one of the characters that one of the episodes I like the most is episode 7, which covers one of the kids from the rival school and one of the kids from the current school. And it pretty much involves two people who are seemingly completely different and opposite backgrounds, intersect with each other, and then they could truly connect on a truly fundamental level they didn't realize before. And that was shown so well because you understood like where they're coming from, why they felt a certain way, but in a way they still felt the same at the very end. And that's not something that can be easily done because you have to truly portray that relatability, even though I personally can understand to a degree, right? But having to seeing these two characters truly connect to each other and say, we're in a way kindred spirits, even if we're so different. So because of that, it is one of also my favorite anime, and also I'll just quickly mention, like Dawn said, was My Boss is Goofy, right? I want to also mention two shows I particularly like as well, which I think there's a show this season called, I think, The Sons of the Yuzu Family or something, and then Kotaro Going Out. And they're both essentially relating to very fundamental human feelings and traits, which is the Sons of the Yuzu Family deals with family issues because it's a group of siblings without their parents. So you have a lot of family dynamics in that way. And then Kotaro is pretty much a kid who literally lives by himself because he has no parents. And their topics in this series, I'll mention Kotaro because I finished it all, was that I felt so sad when watching Kotaro because even if I couldn't completely understand, you felt for him so much that you wanted to cry. It was, and that's the difference of wanting to genuinely feel if you sympathetic to, in a way, to a degree of empathy, and then feeling forced to feel a certain way. There's definitely a way to do it that's right. There's definitely a way to do it's wrong. So I hope that, like, ideally, when you want to have a show, and not all shows would do this, but you want to feel for the characters or feel for the show in some way. If you feel like empty or nothing, then that's a horrible feeling. Yeah. All right, move on.
So I do wanna lean in on that a little bit. It's like it's easy to kind of get indifferent to a character's struggle when there's always so much misery on screen, or at least misery in their lives. It turns into a situation where I have never seen this person happy, so knowing that they're in this perpetual state of misery doesn't really move me to what happens now, because I've been introduced to this character. I've never seen them happy. I've never seen them, perk up, and I can understand what an author is going for when they want to tell a very miserable or a dark story. But the problem with that is it's difficult for us to bridge the gap between understanding how the character feels when there's this wall of anger and this miasma of depression on top of that. So when there's all of this there for the sake of getting a reaction out of your reader, it can just dull our own senses and emotion to the point where we become just as miserable as a character. It's just that we're not expressing it as outwardly as they are. There are a few cases where a character's backstories and all of this can become so nauseating to the point where we can't make the first steps towards empathy because of this, dare I say, monochromatic style as far as emotional range is concerned. But what I found recently, my mother and I sit down every now and again to watch anime, and the two that I can think of right off the top of my head are Evangelion and Fate Zero. So I'll just as well as Full Metal Alchemist. So I'll try to be brief on all of these descriptions for a minute. The first one with Full Metal, my mother, well, I've already mentioned my mother is a mother. So she instantly gravitated towards the Elric brothers because she sees me in them. She has a son, so these are two children doing what they can to bring their mother back. And the sequence for when Ed and Al bring back their mother and their bodies are permanently disfigured, my mother literally broke down crying watching that sequence. Now, for the rest of us, that hurts us because we don't want to see these two get hurt. But my mother, it hit my mother in such a way in which it can only affect a mother. No mother wants to see her children suffer, and no mother wants to see another child suffer in the process. So that was the greatest hook for her. Never before have I ever seen an anime grip my mother that hard because of the fact that it involved kids. So when you have that first bridge that's gapped, you instantly have someone on board with your story. Now, granted, you can't expect that to affect everyone because I don't have a child myself, so I can't empathize with that, and I can never know what it means to be a mother. But my mom sure does. She sure does. And that's how Full Metal managed to reach her. How Fate Zero managed to reach the both of us in a manner that is quite similar. You see, Kiritsugu Emiya, the main character of the series, on a fundamental level, is not the easiest person to like or even to understand. Because he comes across as borderline nihilistic despite how his goal to save humanity is framed throughout the series. But the episode where we are flung into his backstory to understand where these thoughts come from, what he lost in the process, what his definition of being a hero and his sacrifices, started to understand him. We can't really empathize with where he's coming from per se. We know what he's lost, but we don't think we can get to a point where we can embody that utilitarian perspective. But we understand why he got into this position to begin with. He might not be the easiest person for us to like or to get behind, but it's very difficult for us to not to see the man behind the suffering. It's impossible for us not to really grasp onto, I want to make this world a better place in the way how I see it, and this is how I believe I can do it. We are probably never going to get to that point in life, and I hope none of us ever do. But Fate Zero's strength is ensuring that we can understand Kiritsugu. We probably can't empathize with him, but we can at least sympathize with how he got into this position to begin with. And finally, there's End of Evangelion. Now, the typical thing comes down to, oh, you just didn't get Eva. You just didn't get Eva. And I see where that comes from. But at the same time, there are people who can end up watching Eva and they get the point. Not necessarily in the high horse pretentious way, but they get the point in the sense that Evangelion from start to finish was really a lesson in trying to understand each other as humans, but our inherent fear of that in the first place. Because the thing is, the more we open up, the more we sympathize with each other, the more we let our guard down. And it's very easy for the people that we open our hearts to hurt us the most. That's why Exactly. So this is, and I kind of partially think this is one of the reasons why some of us get angry when shows don't hit the mark with us. Because you promise something, you let our guard down, you wormed yourself into our consciousness and our feelings, and then you end up dropping the ball hard. And it just feels like an abject betrayal because we allowed ourselves to open up to this property. So that's why Eva rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, because we started to sympathize with these characters. We started to understand them, but then End of Eva just feels like it's a slap to the face in the face of that care. My mother, however, saw it differently. once we got to the sequence where the world was pretty much ending, she saw it for what it was, which was basically Shinji ultimately chose to doom the world. However, he still rejected instrumentality to escape pain because he came to see something through his mother. His mother mentioned to him outright that the world is cruel, but we can make anywhere a paradise. So despite the fact that my mom got to the point where she saw Shinji as a genuinely disturbed child, she couldn't help but want to hold him at the end of the day because, again, she has me. I've dealt with things similar to Shinji. That sense of abandonment, that sense of I didn't feel like I was appreciated. I just felt as though I didn't really have anyone in my corner. My mom sees me when she looks at Shinji. So because of that through line of understanding, she came out of the show with a completely different opinion than I've ever seen most people have. And now, like Dawn mentioned earlier, and like what Echo has mentioned too, it's very difficult to expect any of that to land for everyone. It's impossible because a lot of this, whether we like it or not, is based on our preconceived notions going in. So when we actually have a point that we can latch onto, that can affect our perception of what makes the show for us. Like for example, I like Violet Evergarden. I haven't finished all of it, but I can actually see why some people would feel as though it's emotionally manipulative, and it can fall into the category of it wants you to feel sad, and if it makes you feel sad, then it's probably done all the work. It's probably done all the work it needs to do. But a story at the end of the day needs to actually give us more than just negative emotions or more than just wanting to cry. If you ask me, what makes a story stand in the consciousness of people long after it's finished isn't just the sadness or roller coaster of emotions. It's what it managed. It's how it manages not only just to relate to your experiences, but to kind of ground you in the moment, so that long after it ends, you're kind of looking back and wondering, I would like to see these people again, and I'd like to see what their lives look like long before the credits roll. I'll probably never get to see it, but I'm curious enough to want to know what it looks like.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Oh, is it okay? Is it me next, yeah? Or do we? Yeah, me next, yeah.
Let's see.
Because there was a whole thing with Buckle of Dawn and everything. But okay? If not, I'll.
Oh no, you're next. You're next. Go ahead.
Yeah, if that's if that's the case, it's good.
Yeah.
You go.
So, yeah, I actually want to leap off what Echo said earlier, which I agree with. Like as much I like Violet Evergarden and other shows kind of like it, you do have, I think, you do kind of come in with the expectation like, oh, this show is gonna hurt your feelings, and because of that, you basically getting your guard up. But on the same note, at least it's just my experience. On the same note, you're thinking, okay, let's see if if it lands with what it's going for, and because of that, as much as I like it, I wouldn't say it. Like as much as I like it, I wouldn't say it was like the most emotional thing I've watched ever. Because I think the tone it's going for, it's kind of written on it's kind of written on a package. I think, at least for me, maybe you can chime in yourselves about it. At least for me, I think for it to land really hard with me, it's kind of it has to kind of gut check me where I'm just not expecting it. It will not come from nowhere, but like it'll be in a show where it's like, oh, I thought this was a bit more chilled and relaxed and having a fun time, and then all of a sudden it actually goes to a darker tone, but then it still kind of keeps that optimism. I think how the best way to put it is, I think at least why I feel like a good emotional story. I think you kind of mentioned a bit as well, Kat, where if it leans too much in one tone, you get used to it, and you
exactly
lose connection to it. So I think a good story with good emotions, it will have the light and the dark, and it will dance between the two really well. And I got two off the top of my head, but I'll talk about that. It's kind of funny in some ways. They're kind of in the same ballpark of what they aim for, but one did it in way shorter time. I think with me, I'd say One Piece and Gurren Lagann, they they are, at least for me, really good examples of that, like dancing between the tones of like the brightness and the darkness, but they're still having that brightness.
Because I know it might sound a little bit rough on my end, just to kind of chime in like you requested. I know it might sound a little bit rough, especially the thing is, not everyone IRL has it this simple where they can experience a multitude of different emotions at a time, especially when the worlds that they live in don't allow them that privilege of joy or freedom or whatever definition people want to throw around. Like, I personally believe that the world or life itself is shaped off of all of the emotions, from anger, joy, laughter, sadness, all of that. So when a story is so steeped within one way or another, it does run that inherent risk of tuning us out because, like Don mentioned, it can come across as misery porn, and there's just nothing, there's no hope. So when you have a tale that shows us just how happy a character was at one point, like we see that happiness from start to finish, and then all of a sudden they hit that low point. This is why the low point hits us as much as it does. It's because we've seen this character when when they're happy. We've seen them when they're so full of life, and now finally life has finally decided to catch up with them and knock them backside the head. And they don't know how, and they don't know what to do with themselves after that. Like, this is probably the most humane thing that anyone can relate to. We have seen, we see so much pain in our lives, and when it finally catches up to us, no front we put on is going to help us. Now, whether or not that salvation comes from the fact that we have people in our lives to pick us back up, or we have that moment like what Don mentioned, where if you see something that finally pulls you out of the abyss, it's going to vary from person to person. But I feel that the best stories out there are there to remind us that there is always something for you to hold on to at the end. It's not perfect, but there needs to be something that the reader and the viewer can hold on to at the end of the tale. You can still have your tragic endings, yes, but at the same time, even movies like Jinro, The Wolf Brigade, despite the sad ending that it has, we still got to see something of an idea of a happy future for Fusei. We still managed to get something of an idea of what a happy future with him and Kei could look like. But then we as the audience are reminded, this girl is a terrorist, this guy works for an anti-terrorist unit. This is not going to end as happily as you think. But the fact that we can entertain the idea is probably what makes the ending as powerful as it is. So if you ask me, a rich tapestry of emotions is going to sell me any day rather than just something that's completely monochromatic in its tone all the way to the end.
Yeah, because there is no nuance where you can look at it. It's just when it's just done one way, it's just like, okay, well, then that's all there is to extrapolate from it. There's nothing more you can really. Nothing we can really take. There's no hope of, oh, maybe it could have gone like this. There's nothing for you to really think on. It's just, oh, that's the result.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think for me, like, One Piece and Gurren Lagann are really good examples because they are. When I first watched, I'll go through Gurren Lagann. When I first watched Gurren Lagann, I thought, oh, this show looks fun and zany. It's probably gonna entertain me for like a couple of episodes, and I'll probably get bored because it seemed a bit more bombastic than what I was used to. I was kind of new to anime at the time, and then was it episode 8 happened, and I was like, oh, holy crap, okay, this is like it just like because of the tone, it wasn't expected. And I can't I think from what I heard, a lot of people kind of dropped the show there, and I can actually understand why, because it. With these things, it is subjective to the person who's watching it as well. Like where whatever is your equilibrium of emotion on that spectrum will vary from person to person. So then what you can tolerate when you and what stretches what you kind of see as an extreme and takes you out of immersion can vary. But yeah, but for me it was just like, wow, okay, this show it's all bright and bombastic, but it actually goes to really dark places. And then instead of just staying there, because it actually goes back up from there. I don't want to give away too much. It's a quite old show, but if you ain't watched it, I think it's really worth a watch. It's really good. But it's not just the fact that it dug down there. It actually kind of rises back up from it. It's really thematically very accurate for the show. That makes it so impactful, and it's just that big spectrum of emotions it can mess with. I guess, well, you kind of spoke about not so good examples. Angel Beats as well. Like, I like Angel Beats, especially when I watched it back when I was at the time I watched it. But I can totally see why people say, yeah, this is dumb. Like, I totally get it, especially as more that I've grown up and watched shows. I see it kind of from two places now. Because it's kind of, well, like Echo was just saying, where you kind of, especially when I was watching it again, it's like you can kind of tell this person's trying to make cues for you to be sad. And Glory Growing, I think it has a lot of stuff. I think the reason I still say I like it, but I can tell it's kind of trying to goat me into being like into the emotional parts. Is again, at least it has that spectrum of emotions. Like half the time it feels like a flipping comedy, and then it has these moments. But yeah, I think when you can see the man behind the curtain, essentially.
Right.
Lose its motion. And I think, especially the more you write or you start studying writing, the more you can pick up on what's going on. And I think as I've got more deeper into actually the craft and understanding the writing for my own sake, is where I've more easily seen what's happening. So even with shows that are really emotional and I really liked, it wouldn't hit me as hard as it would have if I watched it back before I really understood much about it. So I find for me, it's usually the ones that it will kind of catch me by surprise, that kind of will get me, and it'll be the most smallest silly moment, because again, I think a lot of it comes down to your own personal experience, and like it comes to that, like such small moments for me that it sometimes is actually hard for me to actually conjure up the certain situation. But like 3 times in Cobra Kai, I was like, damn, that hit. Because and it's just really small moments. It's really small moments, and I just didn't expect it. But yeah, I think that's kind of my point. Yeah.
I guess Dawn. Well, Dawn, you'll finish up.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to do that. What I wanted to add is that I personally don't think that not authors. I believe that most people who do writing, especially those who do it recreationally, shouldn't stress themselves out too much about trying to make an author, make a reader empathize or sympathize with your character.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, honest to God, look at the stories that you love yourself, look at the way that those characters are expressed, and try to note down the reasons why you like those characters and what parts of them made you like those characters. I'd say to try and consider and then amalgamate those traits and then create characters by yourself. You'll find naturally through kind of, the idea of, imitation is the highest form of flattery. You'll find that through imitating what you like about other characters and hell, even the people around you, that you'll naturally be able to execute something that sounds really, really difficult. I feel like when I especially began writing, when I was younger, I used to take a lot of inspiration from the immediate material that I would consume. So let's take a story like Black Butler, for example. I watched Black Butler when I was like super young. Honest to God, brilliant story. The anime made it seem a lot more like kind of Fujoshi bait than this series actually is. But anyway, that's fine. But when I first read Black Butler, it was half of what made me write my first like kind of big story insignia when I was younger. And looking back on it, there were a lot of things that you could see that were me trying to imitate the author to try and essentially replicate what I liked in things. But I think it's thanks to that experience of writing that out and writing characters who, better represented the things that I liked about characters that I read, whether I empathized or sympathized with them. That gave me a better impression of how to do it now. And I would say to anyone who struggles with this topic, especially with feeling like they might be doing too much of one thing and not enough of another, is to try and give your work or at least a summary of your work to someone else. Have them look at it with a kind of a fresh pair of eyes. Someone who's going to be a little bit less biased than yourself, to look at your work and tell you what they think of the character straight up. Because I do it all the time and it's helped me so much. I know that not everyone has a chance, so if you don't have a chance to do it with someone you know in person, there's always people on the internet. These forums are huge, they're still very much active. I'm sure people can list a few forums that they use personally. Or hell, you can even join the Discord, like our Discord, you know? We all just send each other our stories and talk about it when we can. But I would say that if you do struggle with that, that's definitely something you can do. But yeah, I would honestly say, don't aim for empathy specifically. When you aim for empathy specifically, you end up with problems that come up in shows like Angel Beats, where part of the reason why Angel Beats was touted as such a big and emotional and sad show is because it employs a tactic that a lot of anime do, where you'll have something that's sad, and they're like, oh, we want to get rid of this character. How do we make sure the audience cares? What if we just hit them with a last-minute flashback explaining all of the tragedy they've ever gone through? Let's just hope that this is going to organically hit our audience. It never works, and it doesn't work for a reason. People do not like being bombarded with information, and even less when it's information that tells them how to feel about a character.
Yep.
I don't want to be told how to feel about a character. And I know it can be confusing to say that, so let me clarify what I mean. Telling me that people in a universe believe that a character is evil is not telling me how to feel about the character. Telling me how to feel about that character is going, oh yeah, look at this person, they're so sad. Look, they're like an orphan, and like they're missing like 3 legs. And like, you know, they have cancer too. Don't you feel sad? You should feel sad. That's telling me how to feel. And you know what? I'm gonna keep it real with you. I am a very skeptical audience member because I write. All like people who are creatives will always have a bit more of a discerning eye for certain things than those who don't. We all know this. We're all writers we're all writers, we're all artists, we all do these sorts of things. We're gonna have a bit more of an eye out than most common audiences. So I would say take everything we say with a grain of salt, because we are going to notice some things a bit sooner. And I think sometimes, you know,
we could be a
being
bit too
hyper-vigilant can be a bit harmful. Yeah, exactly. We can sometimes make people a bit hyper-vigilant with some things.
Because the thing about being writers like us is that you remember that whole man behind the curtain thing that Nate and I keep bringing up.
But we notice it faster because we know because we are often the man behind the curtain. If I know I'm like the man behind the curtain, it's really easy for me to see one. You know, it takes one to know one.
Exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, so I'd honestly say, when it comes to these things, try to see what I know it might seem like a bit of a harsh term, but a layman thinks. See what they see. If they are telling you that something is blatant, take a look again. Because when a common audience member turns around and points out an issue, it is very blatant. An author is always going to point out these things a bit sooner, but when a normal audience member turns around and tells you, okay, this is now just kind of insulting at this point, just rewrite the whole thing. But yeah, I would honestly say, don't try to write for empathy. When you write for sympathy, use it sparingly. Please use it sparingly. And when you use it sparingly, give us time to care about characters before you kill or hit them with tragedy. Because this was mentioned multiple times by multiple of you, but the idea of seeing a character who's always miserable, I'm not really going to be super invested in seeing them happy if I don't get the opportunity to see that first. You need to pre-establish these things. Yeah. Like, if you want me... So, okay, I'm going to mention a series. I'm not going to lie to you. I have not read very much of it. I've read like 10 chapters max. But thank you to the internet, I have learned a lot about this series through social osmosis alone. So let's talk about it. Berserk. Half of the reason why the Berserk audience absolutely love the work is because we don't see Guts miserable all the time. This man has had one of the most difficult, most upsetting upbringings I've ever read about. And some of that stuff that happens to him is genuinely world-shattering for the vast majority of people. People love to make little quirky jokes about it. Oh my god, he was 8. But the thing is, in reality, this shit is fucked up. But you know the reason why people want to see Berserk have a better, like people want to see characters in Berserk, especially Guts, have a better life? It is because they see Guts can be happy. He can smile. He is surrounded by people who wish him ill will, but there are people out there who would die for him. And it's that dichotomy that gives people the want to cheer him on. People can sympathize with him. People can empathize, but we want better for him because we know he's capable of it.
Exactly.
And that is the cincher. You want your audience to believe they are capable of it. Not even necessarily capable of achieving it, but capable of living it. And there is a difference between those two things because, okay, sorry, another example. Spoilers for Cyberpunk Edge Runners for those of you who haven't watched it, but at the end of Cyberpunk Edge Runners, our heroes lose. They lose miserably. Everyone fucking dies, with the exception of 2 of a group of 9 people from the start. And Lucy, who is kind of like our female main character, obviously David dies, but Lucy is left broken and a shell of herself at the end of the series. But despite all the odds, despite everything, even though we knew they weren't capable of reaching the moon, of doing what they wanted to do, we cheered them on because we saw that they could have had it. Yes, it's not about the possibility of being able to do it. It's about the implication that if they do it, there will be better times. You don't need to make up stakes and make up ideas of people being able to succeed, because sometimes we know that something is unsurmountable. But people will still cheer because the possibility that that scale could be turned is everything.
Unattainable
and
dreams
that is the difference. Exactly. And that is the difference between empathy and sympathy. It is the idea that someone can do that. And it's the idea that if they don't, it is yeah, sure, you're going to pity people who don't make it. But the person inside of you, the person who wants to empathize within you, is cheering them on.
Exactly.
And making your audience cheer someone on isn't the only sign of empathy or sympathy. It's not. But it's definitely one of the easiest to identify. So I would say to anyone who's struggling with empathy or sympathy in their works, or even any work, to be honest, is look back at the stuff that you've done, as in terms of the things that you've cheered on, the things that you like. Keep in mind, there's always someone out there who will like the same things as you, no matter how vague it is. Trust me, people are into some weird shit. Don't worry, there is always someone out there who likes the same stuff as you. But look at the stuff that you enjoyed in media. Look at the stuff that you've enjoyed in your life. Try to dissect the things you like. And if you need help, talk to other writers, talk to other readers. They will talk to you. People love sharing what they enjoy. Trust me, we know. We made a podcast. But, it's this idea. If you want people to empathize and sympathize and see you for who you are, you need to put yourself out there first. To be able to receive help, you need to put yourself out there. So I would say, put yourself out there. Try to look at the stuff that you enjoy yourself. Dissect it. Try to make something of it. Get feedback. Repeat the cycle. You won't even realize a lot of these authors did the same things. All of your favorite creators have done very similar things, because that's just how we work. We're very social. Take advantage. But so that's how I'd end this whole thing.
Yeah. Honestly, I can't think of a better way to end it. Like, literally, most of half you said that I was gonna ditto anyways, and then honestly,
I'm amazed that this topic went as well as it did. Honestly, well, what am I saying? We're all awesome. I shouldn't be surprised in the slightest.
Come on, man. Every this is easy, man. Easy work. Honestly, guys, thank you. This has actually been really, really, really awesome topic. Not both all the topics we done just been really great.
Indeed, I think it's the longest episode we've had in a long time. Honestly,
it probably is.
Yeah, it actually is. Yeah,
I haven't looked at the time yet, but it probably is. All right, guys. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining. Yeah, honestly, been really, really, really awesome. And thank you guys for watching. And well, this is the Lounge Podcast, episode 21. And until next time, I see you later. Bye.
Bye.